Hey there, you're listening to episode 110 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Cody, and I'm here with my co-host and brother, Keelan. Today, we're talking to Zenet Maramara, founder and president of Christian Stewards in the Philippines. Zenet entered the generosity sphere on the fundraising side, where God showed her just how powerful generosity could be in transforming a person's life and faith. That initial seed later led Zenet to build a multidimensional platform to empower the Filipino Church with generosity champions across the realms of business, ministry, and the local church. Christian Stewards has become a beacon of generosity in the Philippines and beyond, and Zenet had all kinds of wisdom to share with us. You don't want to miss this one. Before we get started, I wanted to ask a big favor. If you've been listening to this show for some time and want to support what we're doing, one very easy and free way to do that is to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Just write whatever you like about the show and you'll help others find us. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you're the first to know when new episodes come out. With that, let's get to the interview. All right, we're here early this morning from Maryland with Zenet Maramara, who is calling from the Philippines. It is evening time for her. Zenet, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my privilege.
Zenet, can you kick us off today and tell us a little bit about your personal background?
Sure. I was born in a Roman Catholic background, just like most people in the Philippines. I'm the oldest of 5 siblings, and I was the last in my family to get converted to evangelical Christianity. I guess I was stubborn. So I was already 31 years old when I became a born-again Christian. And I wanted to fast-track my Christianity because I was late. And I wanted to share my newfound faith to most of my friends who are Roman Catholics. And so I went to Asian Theological Seminary the following year that I became a Christian. And after I graduated from 2 degrees, I joined the staff. I never left the seminary until I retired 6 or 7 years ago. So I held different jobs.
And Zenet, what was life like growing up in the Philippines?
Life growing up in the Philippines, we're so family oriented, you see, because we were very clannish. You wouldn't believe it. Maybe it's scandalous for Americans to hear that we have extended family, relatives living with us. We have grown up children in their 30s or 40s if they're single, or even if they're married, who would live with their parents. So growing up, my mom was so generous, and I grew up with cousins from both sides of the family because they would come from the provinces and my mom would support them in sending them to school. So it's very tightly knit, family oriented growing up.
Now, I know that you are pretty involved in the generosity space now. I'd love to hear where God started to kind of get your attention with regards to generosity, where that started to become a theme in your life and how God started to move in that way.
Yeah, in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, I was fundraiser for ATS. I was a one-woman shop. I was not trained in fundraising. I took that job. They took me in because I was a communications graduate, but I really didn't have any formal training. So after 7 years in that job, I asked for leave, a study leave to study fundraising so that I can hone my skills. I thought by educating myself in the art and science of fundraising that I could raise more money for Asian Theological Seminary or ATS, because at that time I was very transactional in my way of doing fundraising versus being transformational about it. So I went to the US, took my second MA in public relations and studied fundraising. And I had a second conversion. It was a conversion to biblical stewardship. The father of 700 Club founder Pat Robertson, Gordon Robertson, he saw me at Regent University where I was studying. And because he knows that I am the fundraiser for ATS, because he lived here in the Philippines for 5 years. And he said, Zenet, whose money are you fundraising? Isn't it all God's money? That simple statement was life-changing for me. I knew God owns everything, including the money I'm fundraising, but it's only up here to my head and it didn't go down to my heart. So that was a very clear transformation and I felt liberated. There was a sense of freedom that's right. It's all God's money. Why am I feeling I am responsible for raising the annual budget for my school? Why do I feel I am in control and I am the owner of this responsibility when it truly belongs to God? So that was liberating for me. I came back to the Philippines excited and I started the local fundraising program. And actually, I had a very specific task from the leadership of the seminary to reverse the giving ratio of 70% foreign funding and 30% local giving. So now Asian Theological Seminary is 99% funded from local giving. And I wanted to network with other fundraisers. I'm a natural networker. I called up all the other seminaries. There are at least 8 or 7 big seminaries in the Philippines. And lo and behold, I didn't find anybody with that position. I was alone because during that time, there was no training in fundraising. Fundraising is not very popular. We don't do it. We do everything by faith and by chance for some. And I thought that maybe I need to do something about how to teach other seminaries and nonprofit organizations how to mobilize God's resources for the ministry and for kingdom work because of my conversion. When I was converted the second time, I had a very clear personal mission from the Lord. That is to advance or to promote biblical stewardship education. That's how I was going to glorify God. So my whole life, for the 40 years that I have been a Christian, my niche has always been stewardship, generosity.
Zenet, you mentioned the difference between transactional and transformational fundraising and how that was something you learned through this lens of stewardship. Can you share a little bit more about the difference between those two types of fundraising?
So a transactional fundraiser looks at people as donors, as ATM machines, as sources of funds, and not as stewards on a journey towards becoming rich towards God. And I look at them as donors, and a transactional fundraiser is focused on the gifts, not on the person who is on a journey. And a transactional fundraiser is very much after results or reaching the goal or the objective or raising the amount of money you need to raise each year. But when I learned that fundraising is transformational, that it is a way to connect people and their resources to God, then I felt that this is not just about money. It's about the issue of the heart. Like giving is just a barometer of our spiritual condition. And money is a way to test us whether we are fully surrendered to God or not. So that really changed my whole perspective and paradigm of doing fundraising. And it became more enjoyable because I love people and now I am really helping them get that freedom so that they're not in bondage with material things.
So there's a lot of things that I want to dig into from what you've shared already. But I think this is a unique conversation because we talk a lot to givers who are on one side of that relationship and their giving journey and how God has stretched them. But we don't get to talk to a lot of people on the fundraising side, and you're kind of on all the sides. But I would love to hear, especially now with all the experience you've had of really digging into this area for much of your life, what kind of advice would you give let's say, a new fundraiser who's stepping into a role with a ministry or something like that, and they are not even sure where to start and a little bit overwhelmed at the task given to them, what kind of guidance would you give somebody like that and how to really step into that role and how to do it well?
Yeah, you're very right. It can be overwhelming, and not a lot of people want to do fundraising. They'll do all kinds of ministry, but not fundraising because they have a different view of it. It's the transactional mindset. I say that if you're new in fundraising, that you need to articulate your theology of fundraising, articulate your theology of the steward, articulate your theology of God, because from there, it will guide you into all the things, into all the activities, into all the methods that you're going to do in fundraising. And I think it's important because that will also be the basis of how you communicate with donors. If you communicate to them in a transactional way, like, okay, you're giving away $1 million and what's in it for you? This is what's in it for you. These are the benefits to you. But if you talk to them about how God has blessed them, and part of that is for them to share their blessings and that they can be a channel to solve the many ills of the world. That's why we have many charitable institutions. So it starts from there. Actually, it's the basic principle of God's ownership and man's stewardship. So I think it's very exciting if the new fundraiser realizes that she's actually on a mission. And if you're familiar with Henry Nouwen's spirituality of fundraising, he says that fundraising is as spiritual as giving a sermon, as prayer, or going on a mission, because you're helping people understand who they are and how to relate with the resources that God has entrusted to them. So start with that, and everything else will just fall into proper place, because the art and science of fundraising, you can easily get that everywhere. You go to any seminar on fundraising, they'll teach you strategies, tactics, methods, but the heart of it is knowing what you do. And fundraising is just a way to help people become liberated from materialism, for example, and being self-centered and surrendering all to God and finding joy and freedom in giving.
I think it's fascinating the way that you framed fundraising, because I think, at least in my experience and maybe many other people's experience, we are navigating so many solicitations throughout the day for different products, different services, and included in that is people who are raising funds for various causes. And I think it's easy to put all of those things into one category of people who want something from me, from us. And the way that you framed it, it's really the opposite. And as a fundraiser, you have the opportunity to invite people into something that God is doing. And there's a significance to that role. It's completely different than the way that most transactions are really done today. And I think it can be kind of exhausting to just have all these emails and cold calls, and you just kind of have to turn it off to keep yourself sane. But when you focus on the relationship, there is a benefit to the person that you're speaking to by saying, hey, I want to invite you into something that God's doing. And I just want to explore if that's something that you might want to participate in. There's a spiritual benefit to that, which is really significant. And I think that is an element of, you talked about your second conversion to this stewardship mindset, and that led you to the formation of Christian Stewardship Association. Can you talk about how that came to be and why you started that organization?
I was a fundraiser for ATS, like I mentioned, and I had to go to the States to find training because I learned a lot during my time of studies and during my conversion. And I wanted that experience to be shared to others. So I invited a group of like-minded people. I think the first meeting we had about 10 or 11 people, but there were 5 who helped me organize we call it Christian Stewardship Association when we started it, like the CSA in the States, because I was attending CSA seminars in the 90s and the early 2000s. And now we call ourselves Christian Stewards. It took us maybe 2 years to really determine who we are and what our mission would be. Are we going to help people, connect them to funders? Eventually, we decided, no, we like to teach ministry fundraising. We like to teach what is a steward. So we started teaching fundraising, I think, in 2000, because I'm still working for the seminary at that time. So it was easy for me to put out seminars, conferences, certificate programs, and ATS was my primary partner in doing that because there was a lot of demand for it. We were the only Christian NGO teaching ministry fundraising. So we've helped a lot of individuals and nonprofit organizations who've gone through our certificate program in fundraising and our conferences and other seminars.
So I know that what you guys do now has really broadened to quite a number of programs. What would you say is your guiding mission today? And then what are some of the programs that you guys offer at this point to different groups of people?
So Christian Stewards is really about multiplying faithful and generous stewards. And we like to see church and society flourishing because everybody become rich towards God. And also we like to teach the theology of the steward because that's really very important for us, for you to know the theology, what the Bible teaches about you being a steward and God as the owner, the provider, the sustainer of all things, and the freedom and joy that goes with that understanding and practice. So we have teaching and training. We have generosity retreats. We do the journey of generosity. We offer the McClellan's Stations of Generosity, and we created our own open-handed generosity curriculum so that we can provide this to church workers, to Christian educators, to pastors, to help them integrate it in their preaching, teaching, and even in their Christian education. So we serve 3 groups of people. For the business people, we do Journey of Generosity for them. For everybody, we bring them to the experience of Stations of Generosity. And then the open-handed generosity curriculum for churches. And then we do also generosity conferences. We do a yearly generosity conference we call the Philippine Generosity Summit. And then last year, we had a Global Generosity Summit, piggybacking on our Generosity Summit. So we had 60 generosity leaders from around the world who came to Manila to talk about generosity and how we can move forward. And then this year, we're collaborating with McClellan and the Philippine Mission Association for bringing Alan Barnhart to do a series of 7 conferences for business people, church and youth leaders, and then smaller meetings for business people. So we're doing that in September, from September 16 to September 21, with Alan Barnhart here in Manila, in Cebu, and Davao. So in all 3 big islands of the Philippines. I'm big on collaboration.
Zenet, it's amazing how you described being the only person in a fundraising role at one time across 7 or 8 different seminaries in the Philippines to now having annual conferences and all kinds of programming and teaching and programs that you're hosting and leading. It sounds like the landscape has really transformed as well for the stewardship mindset across the Philippines. And I'm really curious, as you talk about Global Generosity Summit, and you also talked about having 70% external funding and 30% within the country, how have you navigated, how have you learned to communicate the message of biblical generosity across different cultures?
Well, our primary mission is in the Philippines. But because of the internet, we've become global because it's easy for people to join online teaching, right? Like, for example, in our fundraising institute, we have people from Qatar, from Vietnam, but it's not my intention to go global because there's a lot of work in the Philippines and we're the only ones doing it and we cannot do it alone. That's why I mentioned earlier that I am big on collaboration. We need to leverage on the strengths of other like-minded organizations. So we do a lot of events to promote the message of generosity. Like, for example, we have a monthly webinar on generosity. And the content is from our open-handed curriculum, which we developed through the help of Generous Church, through the Generosity Design Lab. We teach the 4 biblical themes on generosity, and each of the 4 themes have 3 principles. So that's 12 principles. So every month we will have 1 principle. So that's the webinar. And then we do conferences and training, and we use the social media platform as well to bring the message of generosity. And one other thing we do to invite people who are more serious, because I want to identify who are these generosity champions and who could be generosity advocates. We started doing the monthly generosity breakfast fellowship. And out of that, there are really people who will say, Zenet, I would like to host the next Generosity Breakfast Fellowship. So we have people lining up, and there are people saying, I want to be a champion. I want to champion generosity. So that really excites me, so that I am multiplying generosity advocates and stewards. And that is really my vision, that every church, every 92,000 evangelical churches in the Philippines would have at least one generosity champion who will, coordinate the teaching of generosity in their church. So I'm working very closely with the Evangelical Church Alliance in the Philippines. And in fact, they have a program to consolidate all the discipleship training material and come up with a standard discipleship material and said, I am going to give you our open-handed generosity curriculum. And I think they were convinced that they need to integrate generosity in disciple making because it's not intentional. We don't see churches teaching generosity or giving as part of their discipleship because they don't have the materials. And now we do.
I love the vision of a generosity advocate or champion in every church. And I think that is just as lacking in the US too, that really it is such a core tenet of faith and discipleship and growth in our surrender, like you talked about earlier, that it really should be kind of a core part of the rhythms of teaching and study and just kind of the disciplines of faith for anybody as Christians. But you're exactly right that I think many churches all over the world in every culture are really lacking generosity as a core teaching component. And I love that mission for every church in the Philippines to have a generosity champion of some kind and that they would just continue to spread. It's funny how many times I've heard people like you passionate about generosity speak about it in the same way that we talk about sharing the gospel and sharing, just the message of Christ and that excitement for others to see and to experience what we ourselves have experienced. That same thing that overflows our faith is also what overflows our desire to see people step into generosity. And it's people like you that are coming from a place where you're not coming from a fundraising standpoint. In your position, you're coming just from a true discipleship and empowerment kind of standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from the fundraising side is just as important, like you said, but there is a strong need for organizations and champions like you and the many leaders that have come out from Christian Stewards. It's like when we talk about generous giving in the States or Generosity Path, the international version, inviting people in and making no ask, just saying, we just want to see you grow in generosity because we've seen it in our own lives. I'm sure that you have people that come to mind when you think about people that before didn't really have an understanding or a concept for generosity and have come through, either some of your training or your programs or other givers and stewards that you have come across in your work. But I don't know if there's somebody that comes to mind or other stories of how people's lives have been changed and then how they have kind of turned into one of these generosity champions like you've talked about, and how you can just see that overflowing in their lives.
Actually, one of my colleagues in the faith-driven entrepreneur, because I do network with the faith-driven entrepreneur, they're here in the Philippines. Out of that, there's this business person named Jim Ayala. Jim Ayala was converted to learning that his business can be redemptive, that he can do kingdom work doing business. So what he did was to sell his beautiful house, which is a status symbol in the Philippines. He sold this beautiful house in order to start a social enterprise to provide solar lamps for rural areas where they don't have electricity. I mean, school children, they study under a kerosene lamp. So he started doing that. He has already provided 1 million solar panels. So that's a social enterprise. And he is now just living in a condominium unit, but he's very happy with the freedom of being able to do something that would create an impact in the lives of people, especially those who are marginalized, who literally are powerless. They don't have electric power. And they're very poor in some parts of the regions of the Philippines. So that's one person that I have in mind. But I organized the MBA program at ATS. I think we're the only seminary in the world that has an MBA program, but it's an MBA in biblical stewardship and Christian management. So one of our graduates, my former student, was so impacted by the teaching of stewardship. And they had a business, it's a bakery business. Now that bakery business has grown into several local churches. They have a spirituality center. They have a creation care center. They had a journey of generosity they call JOG, without knowing it's almost a trademark of generosity path or generous giving. And they have schools. And it's amazing the kind of impact that this one person, because she applied what she learned about stewardship and generosity from our program, and so many lives in the communities have been impacted. And one other outreach was a livelihood and cooperative program among the women. And that's very effective in the Philippines to raise the level of the quality of life or go out of poverty. You have to have livelihood or combine resources and start a cooperative. So those are just two examples, Keelan.
Zenet, I know you've studied the concept of leadership and do training around leadership as well. And you've mentioned two different leaders in business that have incorporated a stewardship mindset, incorporated generosity into how they run their businesses, and they're having tremendous impact. How do you see business leaders uniquely positioned to live out, to carry out this generosity message?
I heard somebody say business is the new Roman roads for the gospel, because we're in the marketplace more than we are inside the church on Sunday. So most people are in the marketplace. And if you are a business leader, then you have a lot of influence, you have a lot of power, you have a lot of resources. And just an example of one business person, this Jim Ayala that I talked about, how he was able to create impact in the lives of so many people. And that's just one business person. That's why I think we need to empower the business people. I love the theology of work, the integration of faith and work. And if we teach that among business people, then they are empowered to bring the gospel. Their pulpit could be the business place, could be the marketplace. They don't have to be pastors or missionaries, but the marketplace or the workplace is a huge mission field for the gospel and even for generosity. And we see a lot of movements now, not just the business as mission, not just the faith-driven entrepreneur, redemptive business. In the Philippines, many churches are now organizing marketplace ministry or business people's fellowship. In fact, one of the Filipino Chinese churches in the Philippines would like to host our Generosity Breakfast Fellowship in October because most of their people are business people. They're Chinese business people. They've inherited the business from their fathers, and their fathers and mothers are not necessarily Christian, and they want to invite them to these groups and, teach them about the gospel and how to be generous. So it's exciting that churches are now organizing ministries for business people.
What have you found effective in specifically reaching those in the business world with the message of generosity, especially those who are kind of new to that conversation or new to that idea?
So we have the tool. One of the tools we use is the journey of generosity. We gather 15 to 20 people and invite them to an overnight retreat. And that is a safe space where they can freely talk about money because people don't talk about money. It's a taboo subject here. But we can freely talk about money during that time. And a lot of people have a change of heart because money is a heart issue. And once they are transformed, then they want to share this to their families. They want to share this to their business colleagues. So we give them training on how to facilitate these overnight retreats. And one of the things that we would like to do is plan a really high-end retreat out of town. We'll call it a spiritual retreat, if you will, because some business people want to have a respite from their daily business grind. So we take them to a beautiful resort out of town for an overnight talk. It's just a spiritual retreat for them. And hopefully we will get a lot of demand for that kind of retreat. I really find that very helpful because it's a close conversation among like-minded people. You can be colleagues, you can be members of one church, you can be from one company or one organization, and there's freedom to freely talk about money and giving and generosity. And then we do vision casting during the Generosity Breakfast Fellowship. I cast the vision and then we challenge them. If the Lord is speaking in their hearts, we challenge them to advocate for generosity.
Zenet, how do you talk about leadership to people who are already in leadership positions? It seems that there are countless examples throughout Scripture of God raising up people in leadership positions to accomplish His purposes. And it sounds like you're getting opportunities to speak to people who are already in those positions. And I mean, we know from just hearing story after story that we are not put in positions to steward a lot of resources or influence a lot of people to increase our own status among people. So when you are talking to some of these business leaders or ministry leaders about how to think about leadership, what kind of concepts come up?
Actually, I really am very passionate about sharing and promoting the steward leader theology and practice because it's an upside down leadership because most leaders have the power, but a steward leader shares power, shares privilege, shares the purpose of what the organization or the company is all about. So I love that people can understand that what they have, the position, the power, the leadership, the company, these are all a trust from the Lord. They don't own it. So the concept of ownership, sometimes especially for founders or people who started a business, they have that ownership mentality. But the steward leader theology teaches that it's God who eventually is the owner and the CEO of your business. And you have just been given that trust from the Lord. So how will you then operate your business? It must be in keeping with God's purposes and agenda. And another issue is control. And I've been there, feeling that I am in control, that I own the responsibility and the position, when it's really God's. And that gives them a lot of freedom. It liberates them to think that, okay, leadership is not mine. I don't need to cling so tightly to it, because some people are very controlling or some leaders think that they have the right idea. But for me, a steward leader empowers people and builds trust and models what it means to be a generous person, because generosity is not just about money. It's about sharing your mind, your competence, your expertise, your influence, and everything you know. I know that in the corporate world, that's not the way it is. You hoard information because information is power. But a steward leader shares information because it will empower others. So we have docked the ship in stewardship and leadership and focus on the person, because the becoming is more important than the doing. If you become to be the steward that God has created you to be, then the doing will follow.
You guys have such a broad reach now in terms of the types of people that you are trying to reach and the different segments, from the business world to the fundraising world to just everyday people.
Church. Mm-hmm.
What would you say are some of the core concepts that somebody has to really internalize in order to kind of go through that second conversion that you talked about going through yourself, where a light turns on and they now actively are pursuing generosity and stewardship in their life, whereas before maybe it felt like a burden? What are some of the core beliefs or understandings that somebody has to really come to in order to go through that experience?
Again, I will go back to the concept of ownership and control, and then full surrender. Because sometimes we say we surrender all, but there are areas in our lives that we have not surrendered. And sometimes maybe we are not conscious of it. So we have to get somebody else to mirror us. Like as iron sharpens iron, we want to be accountable to somebody. That's why it's good to have a mentor, and it's good also to mentor somebody. If you have a mentor, then that can guide you. For me, in my walk or journey as a steward, I found that building my spirituality is really very helpful, because I come from a Roman Catholic background. And when I became a born again Christian, spirituality is not that developed or sophisticated, but I know that spiritual direction, spiritual companioning, being accountable to somebody spiritually and otherwise is really very helpful in my walk, because sometimes we have blind spots that we cannot see. And again, I want to reiterate the importance of surrendering ownership and control to God, because that's really His. Even in our exercise of generosity, if we hold lightly to the material things that God has entrusted to us, then it's easier for us to listen to God when He's trying to call us to move that resource or move that money to where it is most needed, if we hold on lightly. So control and ownership and full surrender.
You have talked about collaboration a number of times just in this conversation, and I know that you serve on multiple boards focused in these different areas, especially generosity. How do you see different elements of this community working together? And by that, I mean, there's many different ways that people participate, and you are very educated. You're doing a lot of training and teaching. You've been in the fundraising role, and you have so much wisdom to pass along, but you also see such a broad perspective on what is happening in the Philippines. How have you seen different organizations working together to better equip the church to carry out generosity?
First off, I like to say that collaboration is a very sexy word, and I love it. But it's very challenging, Cody, Kilan. It's not easy because not everybody could be on the same page as you. sometimes you have to convince them. That's why in collaboration it's important I pick the low-hanging fruit first so that I don't need to do a lot of persuasion or convincing. Because once they hear you talk about collaboration, and if they're on the same page with you, there's no questions asked. They say, I want to be with you. Like, for example, you say, I'm into a lot of collaborative groups and generosity networks. I am. Now we have this new collaborative group called Kingdom Keepers. And we're trying to grow our number. We started with 3 or 4 people who want to help smaller Christ-centered organizations with fundraising, with governance, putting their house in order because they don't know how to do it. They don't have the capacity. So we want to increase our number. And then collaboration, I think this is what God has intended for us to be. He formed us as a community, like the Trinity is a community. And we cannot do the work of the gospel alone. We cannot even push generosity by ourselves because we are just small. But if we combine our strengths, our competencies, then we can have synergy, greater impact. And that's why I'm all for collaboration. I don't know if you have read Peter Greer, Rooting for Rival. I think it's a great book on collaboration. So I'm championing collaboration in the Philippines. And I think, Cody, you're familiar with the concept, the Philippine generosity ecosystem. So I'm trying to grow the Philippine generosity ecosystem, inviting individuals, groups, and organizations to see where they fit in the framework of the ecosystem, where you have content providers, capacity providers, community providers, capital providers. That's the framework. And some people can see themselves where they fit. So yes, I love collaboration. And I think God wants us to collaborate and let go of our logos and egos and just love one another and do the work of God and work for one kingdom of God. Because that's what we serve, only one kingdom.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that is a growing theme that we are seeing across many domains of God's kingdom, really. We're seeing that in the missions world at unprecedented levels of collaboration between organizations, people not caring anymore who gets credit for what, but just wanting to see God move in powerful ways. And we're seeing that in the poverty alleviation world as well. Mm-hmm. Organizations, ministries collaborating in powerful ways. And now we're seeing that a lot in the generosity world, as you really have a front seat to in your line of work. And I think that that is where we really get the best glimpse of how God truly works, basically pulling the best pieces of how God has designed each person, each organization, each movement, blending it all in together, and then all out of a posture of surrender and waiting expectantly for God to work and seeing how he might work. And I think we are seeing more and more of that every day, which is very exciting. And that's a big theme that we love to talk about on the podcast, as well as just collaboration and really getting to see really the true inclusive nature of God and how he has really designed us to act as one body. We have covered so many things here, and I would love to hear what you are most excited about coming on the horizon in the next couple of years, next 5 or 10 years or so, where you see God moving, where you hope to see him move, and what kind of things that you're working on now.
I love this concept, the Lausanne movement, this concept of polycentric Christianity, polycentric mission, polycentric resource mobilization. It's missions from everywhere to everywhere. It's money from everywhere to everywhere. So the center of Christianity is moving from the West to everywhere around the world, not just to the global South, but everywhere, but especially in the global South, in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa. And I think that concept of polycentric partnership is something that we want to communicate to people because not very many people understand polycentric partnership. Many of us in the global south are so used to getting support from the West because that has been the traditional way of doing missions, because the West has a lot of resources to share to less developed regions of the world. But now I think God is moving in such a way that everybody can participate in the gospel, in missions, in polycentric resource mobilization. So I think it's exciting that that is the main theme of the Fourth Lausanne Congress in September. And we're gathering 10,000 people on site and virtually, and we'll talk about polycentric and collaboration. Half of the time, all the afternoon sessions are called collaborate sessions. So Lausanne has identified 25 gaps that we have in mission, in the workplace, in resource mobilization, in the youth, the women, and they're going to talk about how can we best collaborate and close the gaps so that we can accelerate the Great Commission, accelerate the gospel message into all the earth, and then the Lord will come.
Well, I think that is something that we're also very excited for, is just to see increasing levels of this mindset of we're all working towards the same end, the same goal, and how can we support each other to build the kingdom. So I'm right there with you. Well, Zenet, as we are getting to the end of the episode here, we want to leave some time for the Manager's Minute. And that's how we wrap every episode, just with a practical action that our listeners can take to step into their role as stewards and to manage God's wealth wisely. So, Zenet, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
I'd like to share the concept of giving collaboration. Giving collaboration is where like-minded people pool their resources together and agree on a certain project to support so that you can have a more substantial impact. So in Romania, I know this is very successful with Emmanuel Distrain on the lead in giving collaboration in Romania. Emmanuel is the leader, the director of Generosity Path, the global generous giving. And I think there's other parts where they're starting to teach giving collaboration. And actually, it's one of the next steps for people who do the overnight retreat. After they talked about money and they're now very eager to apply what they learn, then they can consider or explore pulling the resources together and do a giving collaboration. So it's a great concept that maybe we can explore.
Yeah, I love that idea. And that encompasses so many of the themes that we've been talking about today. So I highly encourage anybody who has never tried that to try some version of that, because I think it's a really rewarding experience. Zenet, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for all that you're doing, all the ways that God has worked through you and Christian Stewards and through the many leaders that you work beside. But it's just been a blessing to share some of the story together today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and all the best in the Finish Line podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any of our references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 110. Before we finish, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped and answered the question, how much is enough? Financial Finish Line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3, after 90 days, explore the millions of ways you can use that margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.